Today is September 22nd, 2015, and we are interviewing Robert R. McKay at the Illinois State Library. Robert is 67 years old, having been born on October 16, 1948. My name is Karen Fitzgerald, and I'll be the interviewer. There is no court reporter for this interview. Okay, tell me where and when you were born to start off.
I was born in Springfield, Missouri.
Okay.
I was born where my father attended school for linotype for a newspaper he worked for in Chicago.
Okay.
The Chicago Defender sent him to Springfield. And in fact, I was there perhaps 3 months after I was born. We relocated back to Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
All right. Who were your parents and what were their occupations? Well, you already said what your father did. Yeah.
Right, exactly. My mother was basically a housewife. She stayed at home, and then she became a nurse's assistant.
Okay.
Right, after we were up in age and attended school.
Okay. And what were their names?
My father's name was Robert R. McKay,
Same as
Sr.,
yours. Okay.
and my mother is Joyce Dolores McKay.
Okay. All right. Any siblings?
Yes, I have 7 siblings, one deceased. There were 4 boys and 4 girls.
Oh, wow. Big family, huh?
Yes.
What were their names?
My sister, who was next to me, passed away at age 15, around 1966, I believe.
Oh.
She suffered from Hodgkin's disease.
Oh.
Her name was Cheryl McKay.
Okay.
Next to her was Wilma.
Wilma?
Yes.
Okay.
And then came Alfred.
Mm-hmm.
And then Athea.
Athea. How do you spell that?
Athaia. That's the way she spells it. Athea.
Okay.
Yes.
That's great.
And it was Anthony.
Mm-hmm. Anthony.
And then came Eric.
Mm-hmm.
And then because I guess my mother decided this is my first Cheryl, my sister, who was the oldest, she passed away. Then came Cheryl again.
Okay, yeah.
But she was impressed with that name.
Yeah,
yes.
I know a lot of families do that.
Yes.
Yeah. So you were the oldest then?
I'm the oldest, yes.
Okay. Did any of the others serve in the military?
Briefly, my Anthony he only went to basic training, and they discharged him. They had flat feet, and
for flat feet.
They discharged him from the Navy.
Okay.
Right.
All right. And what were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, I had just completed high school, and I worked for a few months at A&P in Chicago. And while working at A&P, there was a friend who, he was a little older than I am. He had graduated from college, and he was drafted and went to Vietnam, and he was killed in Vietnam.
Oh, no.
Right. So I, after the period, and I received the draft notice because the draft was going on during that period.
Right.
After I left high school. In fact, let me say I graduated from Dunbar Vocational High School in the south side of Chicago.
Dunbar?
Dunbar.
How do you spell that?
D-U-N-B-A-R. Paul Lawrence Dunbar.
Okay.
He was a famous black poet.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So we, after graduating from Dunbar, and I was going to attend college in Chicago at DePaul University, but the draft came, and I said, well, I thought about my friend who had gone to Vietnam after he had finished college, and said, well, let me do this first, get this out of the way. I'll go on and relinquish myself to the draft.
Oh.
But then my dad suggested that I look at the Coast Guard. because I didn't know anything about the Coast Guard. And then I thought back. I remember when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I think my aunt gave me a Coast Guard surf boat, the boats that used to go out for rescue, and they rowed them. And I thought back, I said I did have one of those back when I was about 8 or 9. It was a model. So then in fact, I called the Coast Guard after my dad suggested it, and they were located in Berwyn, Illinois. I had to look them in the phone book, and I called over to Berwyn, and then I called the CTA at that time because I was just familiar with the locale of Chicago. Now Berwyn is like the city of Chicago, so
Right.
I took the CTA bus out to the recruiting station, and they had to take an exam, and ultimately I was accepted. I passed the exam, and
So you could do that in lieu of the draft of being
yes,
going into
yes,
the military.
yes.
Oh, okay.
So that way, and then I was really surprised because I know people were going in, who were drafted, they go in and spend maybe 2 years and come out. But after I signed on the dotted line, he said, "Now you're committed for 4 years." So it was 4 years for me.
All right.
In fact, when I took the exam, I don't know how how they were scoring, but they couldn't believe I scored the way I did on their exam. They said I'd scored the highest that they had seen.
Wow.
So they had me take the exam over again.
They thought something went wrong.
Something went wrong. So I took the exam over,
Mhm.
and of course it came out that way. And then they put me in charge of, I think there were about 6 or 7 of us. They gave me all of their records to, I thought, everybody thought it was such a big deal, me being in charge of the group going to basic training. So we left, and basic training was in Cape May, New Jersey.
Okay.
It's like the southern tip of New Jersey on the Atlantic Ocean side.
Isn't that where the hurricane hit? I think Cape May.
I think part of it did hit Cape May
Yeah.
and went on up to New York.
And
And went on up through New
that
York.
one. I forget what
Yes.
it was. Sandy.
Sandy, exactly.
Yeah.
Can't forget that one.
Yeah.
But there I went during a time when I was in boot camp during the time when there was a break. So I think I went in November 22nd. And then because we completed enough time, they gave us a break to go home in the middle of boot camp and then come back. The people who only arrived there, I think that a few weeks before that, they had to remain in basic training at the station until vacation time or holidays were over. So I came home during the holidays in 1967 and then returned to complete it. And once completing boot camp or basic training, I was assigned to the Coast Guard cutter Chase, Salmon P. Chase. And in fact, there was a commissioning detail. They sent me up to Newport, Rhode Island for training and familiarization, shipboard familiarization, firefighting school, and other shipboard duties and responsibilities. We had to go through classes and processes for understanding shipboard. In fact, this new Coast Guard cutter that was being built in Gretna, Louisiana.
Got a good memory for that, huh?
Upon some of this goes in and out, but I'm just remembering as I go, because some of the stuff I may not remember, but and because it's coming back so sharply now, some things I have blocked out for some strange reason, and because of this, I guess that was some of the good times. And
so you enjoyed the Coast Guard?
yeah, pretty much until we'll get to that later. But once completing the stint at Newport, Rhode Island, they flew us down to New Orleans and a Coast Guard plane. I guess it was a cargo C-130 plane. Everybody grouped in the back. So we arrived there, and we had to outfit the vessel with everything. It was the Coast Guard cutter High Endurance. It's WHEC that represents Coast Guard High Endurance Cutter. and our hull number was number 718. There was a third of a series of the Secretary Treasurer's um, vessels. They started at 715, 16, 17, yeah, it was the fourth, 718. And it was called the Hamilton class because the first was the Hamilton, and it was number 715.
Okay.
And it was equipped with, we equipped the ship with everything because there was from flatware up to mattresses, linen, everything had to be loaded onto that, and that was part of our job as a commissioning detail to outfit everything on the vessel, food for the galley, and we got everything. And then once that was completed, we sailed up to Norfolk, Virginia, where the ship had to be degaussed. It was brand new, so that entailed wrapping the vessel in segments with huge cables around, over, under the hull and over the top, and then demagnetize. They call it degaussing, but you're right, absolutely right. So any electronic equipment, audio tapes, watches, anything that would be affected by this demagnetization of the ship had to come off. So all of our equipment had to come off, and this took a process of a few hours. And once that was completed, we carried everything back on that could be affected, so we could get underway.
Sounds like a big ordeal.
It was a big ordeal.
Okay, so then where'd you go?
From there, we sailed into, we were in Norfolk for perhaps a week or so.
Okay.
And then we sailed into Boston Harbor, where they sent out the fireboats and tugboats, and they welcomed us into the Boston, city of Boston. So it was that the chase was assigned there with about 6 other 378. They were 378 feet long. Equipped with 2 Pratt & Whitney aircraft engines, turbine engines, same as they use on your jet aircraft, and 2 Fairbanks Morse diesel propulsion engines. So there were actually 4 propulsion engines, 2 diesel and 2 turbines, and it could really get up in the water.
Oh,
yes.
that, yeah.
Right.
Get moving fast.
Yes.
Huh? Okay. So you enlisted in the Coast Guard, right?
Yes.
You were not drafted.
No.
Okay. And did you stay there in the Coast Guard through the war?
Yes.
Okay.
I stayed in the Coast Guard. I was in for a total of
4 years?
just shy of 4 years, 1 month less than 4 years. So it was like 3 years and 11 months.
Okay. All right. And how long were you stationed in Boston? Was that just
I was stationed in Boston on the chase from the time we arrived in 1968.
Okay, 1968.
I think we arrived there sometime around it was June of 1968. I may be off on that.
Okay.
And while I was there on the chase, we went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, for the shakedown cruise. That's where they take us through drills and wartime drills and underway drills, search and rescue drills, and they score the vessels who participate in that. And I think we scored pretty high in our performance. So you get a performance rating, and you get to carry that or wear that on the side of the vessel. So we were there in Guantanamo for about, let's say about 4 weeks.
Okay. And so did you stay stateside most of the time? Or were you...
Most of my time was stateside, and after a year and a few months of being in Boston, you know, in a way, the way you get promoted in the Coast Guard as opposed to being handed, or I guess, performance promotions. There are exams you take, or you attend schools, and you take the service-wide exams. You compete with the entire body of the military, of the service, to get promoted. It depends on how you land and how many people they need and for that particular rating.
Oh.
And I had put in for several schools, and I ultimately attended damage control school in Governor's Island, New York. After, I think it was around April of 1969 when I was accepted in school in Governor's Island, so I attended there. And while in Governor's Island, the damage controlman's jobs are varied because you're skilled in carpentry, plumbing, bricklaying, welding, blueprint reading, and the list is for that particular rating is fairly extensive because it's similar to a CB in Navy CB, although Navy does have damage control, but the only thing different is CB, they work with heavy equipment and other skills that the damage control, they do the same thing except they have some added skills to their work process.
Okay.
So, and then firefighting also is included because we attended the class attends a 2-week firefighting school at the Philadelphia shipyard, naval shipyard. So I was there for 2 weeks for that. So I got a firefighter rating along with being a damage controlman.
Okay.
And upon completing the damage control school in September of 1969, I was assigned to base Boston, back in Boston, Massachusetts, and at that point, I was transferred after being on the base for about 3 months. I was transferred to the Sherman, which was preparing to go to Vietnam.
Oh.
So in 1970, I was transferred to the Sherman. I think January of 1970.
Okay. So how did you feel about that?
Well, we were in that period when there was a war. You know, many people say the Vietnam was itself was not declared a war; it was a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone refers to it as the Vietnam War,
Mm-hmm.
because when you're fighting and people are dying and you're dropping bombs and
Right.
and other things of that sort, which are war related, it's a war.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I felt there were mixed feelings. You know, the Vietnam era, even in high school, I remember being involved in debates as to whether the Vietnam conflict/war was relevant for the United States, and because the Vietnamese were people who were warring amongst themselves
Mm-hmm.
for over 23 years before the United States became involved in it, because of course we know that the French were there before that,
Right.
because the French has big and huge investments in rubber there in Vietnam. Oh yes, so that
So you learned all this in high school.
learned a lot of it and much of it in high school. Yes, as I recall, I forgot which class. I believe it was history class or one of those classes where the issue of the Vietnam War came up, and we prepared different viewing positions for the
Mhm.
debate. And
How did you feel about it?
well, I felt it was
Personally.
wrong. I felt Vietnam was not a war that the country should have been involved in, but the higher uh, forces than the average citizen were making decisions on that.
Right.
So we had to go along with the process.
Okay. So when you signed up for the Coast Guard, you were hoping to avoid going to the war, right? No.
That never crossed me. But then I learned after being in the Coast Guard in the Coast Guard basic training that many of the politicians were sending their sons to the Coast Guard to avoid.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I don't recall some of the congressmen's sons' names, or even the congressmen's names who had sent their sons to the Coast Guard. But I know that the Coast Guard did have a special forces similar to the SEALs, the Navy SEALs. And one morning, they were out uh, running, practicing, or jogging, and this congressman's son was in the vicinity and perhaps walking towards this group, and they didn't run around it; they stampeded him.
Oh,
So this congressman had this unit disbanded in the Coast Guard. Yes, he had that much clout. Said, cut it out.
did they stampede him because he was a congressman's son?
I'm not sure.
Just
I guess anyone they want to show their manliness that anything in our way, we'll trample over it. But they may have been aware of it. I'm not sure. But I know that they told us while we were there that the Coast Guard basic training was second to the Marines. So we had some pretty rough training.
Hmm. So when you went in, you were just thinking it might be something you would rather do than
Well,
be drafted.
no.
No?
I knew that the draft was coming, and I
Yeah.
in fact was looking at the Army and the Green Beret, and I pointed it out to my father, and he said, "No, you should try the Coast Guard," because he attempted to get in the Coast Guard in World War II, but they weren't accepting. They weren't taking blacks because he lived in Savannah, Georgia at that time, and he attempted to get into the Coast Guard, and they wouldn't let him in. However, he did get into he was a Marine, and he made it.
He could get in the Marines.
He got in the Marines, yes,
That's
not the Coast
weird.
Guard. And it's ironic because Alex Haley, remember he wrote Roots, right? He's a Coast Guard veteran.
Really?
In fact, they have a Coast Guard cutter named after Alex Haley. Right.
So when did he enter? I guess he.
I'm not sure, but I know he perhaps entered the Coast Guard sometime after World War II, if not during World War II. Right. I have to look back at that history because I know he was a Coast Guard veteran.
So when you realized when you went into the Coast Guard that you could go to Vietnam, that you might be sent there on a ship, right?
Right.
Okay, and that's what happened when you were put on the Sherman?
Yes.
And where did you go exactly?
Well, again, before in preparing to go to Vietnam, the Sherman made a brief stop in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I went through some war games, fired our main battery armament, which is a 5-inch 38 caliber round. The round is about like that, and maybe 14 inches long. I'm just estimating now. And plus there was some other stuff that goes in with it, powder, and to make it to project it out to its target. But we fired those. We fired our machine guns. all this stuff to simulate war. And then we transcended through the Panama Canal after we left Cuba on through the Pacific and stopped in Hawaii, where we loaded on supplies and I think one of the diesel engines had some malfunctioning, so we had to that required repairs. The crew working 12 on and 12 off to get that engine broken down, take the pistons out, whatever, as I remember, and reassemble and get it underway to go to continue our voyage to the war zone.
Mm-hmm.
And after we left, we completed that process. I think it took about a week to get that engine repaired.
Mm-hmm.
And then we went on, we stopped in Guam to pick up fuel and artillery. And from that point, we sailed on to Subic Bay in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Philippines, we took on other supplies and did some other remedial preparations for the war zone, familiarization, briefings, and then we were set off to sail to Vietnam.
So when did you arrive? Do you remember?
We arrived on station, actually we arrived in Vietnam in the war zone on our battle station, in our battle zone on, I think it was May 18th. And we started to give gunfire support.
Was that 1970?
1970, yes.
Okay.
And this is our first salvo of gunfire support for the CB base that was in a village called Songong Dak.
How do you spell that?
It's SONG
Mm-hmm.
ONG DOC.
Okay. So you were backup gunfire for the CB?
Well, the base itself
Base.
was backup gunfire because this was at the southern tip of Vietnam. If you
Mm-hmm.
can visualize Florida
Mm-hmm.
on the Gulf side, on the west coast of Vietnam, the west coast of
Right.
Florida,
Right.
where Songong Dak is located. And the first we hit our own troops. We killed in the first salvo of gunfire. We set off and it landed on the base instead of going over the base. And yes, so back then it wasn't called friendly fire. It was called short rounds. And after because we were firing salvo after salvo, and it was about 10 minutes, and we got the ceasefire, yelling, ceasefire, ceasefire. And then, because we had a doctor, we were carrying a doctor with us, and aboard our cutter, we had a helicopter landing pad.
Take your time. Yeah. Should have gotten some Kleenex.
And they flew the victims over.
They flew what?
The wounded.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately we asked them body bags because they, deceased.
Mm-hmm.
We pause for a minute.
Sure. Yeah, let's pause this.
In any war.
Yeah.
But if you look at old war movies or even documentaries of World War II, the landing craft that would take the troops and drop their front loading door off, and the troops would run out. That was the Coast Guard
Oh, really?
delivering. And many of them were shot up or didn't make it back because they would hit the landing craft, and they were part of the casualties in the war.
You never hear about that.
Yes.
How many people were killed on that base?
Well, and I didn't know this until we had a reunion for our unit in 2008. We had a reunion in Portsmouth, Massachusetts, and as we were thinking, like the way they asked for body bags that night, so much confusion. We thought maybe 5 or 6 people were killed, but there was only one, and the because we got information up late as 2008 that this one gentleman was the only one who didn't make it, but they were all mangled. I mean, from the shrapnel, because the way the projectiles were set to explode, air burst. That means that they were bursting above the compound, and shrapnel would rain down. And the story of that particular, I found one online. It's called "Tragedy in Vietnam," and it was that Song on Doc. One person did write about that, and he posted it online. But this happened, and this one person, the one death that did occur, his name was, I think, Hamlet. I believe he said his name was Hamlet, and the others were so wounded. One of the gentlemen, his shorts, he thought that he had lost part of his private area, but then he didn't want to look, so someone else looked for him. Said, "No, it's you're cut
okay.
pretty bad, but it's not. Everything is intact." But yeah, there were a number of them who were bloodied and coming over. They didn't look good coming off the helicopter, but I assisted them.
You helped take them up from the helicopter?
Right. And then when the doctor said, "Send body bags," we thinking that, oh my goodness, we just ruined everything. And they wanted to send us home that night. They said, "Sherman is out of here." But somehow, I guess the captain went over and to assess the damage, and then negotiated, and we stayed on.
How did it happen? Wasn't it just an accident that the shrapnel came down like
No,
that?
someone got the coordinates off. You give your distance. They set the range for the gun to fire in, and someone confused some numbers, and they fell short of their target.
I see. That's why it's called short fire.
Short fire, and then it's friendly fire. The term is friendly fire. They use to term when there's when you accidentally shoot up your own troops.
Yeah, that must be really demoralizing.
Yes.
For your first
night, first time shooting. It was off. Yes.
But you had nothing to do with that, right?
No, not in that particular process. No, that was not part of my assignment.
But you get emotional about it because
Yes, well, I was on station because damage control and the helicopter landing we practiced that also, where there was nets that fold over on the side, and the crew who tie the base of the copter down, and then I'm standing there with firefighting equipment in the event there's an accident. Then I'm out there on the deck when the helicopter lands, and then that part. But as far as battle stations, mine is in damage control, where if we're hit, then I have to take care of any interior, exterior of the vessel that is damaged from gunfire or artillery fire.
Was it just you, or were you the head
In
of
the
a
damage
team?
control team, there were, let's see, we had the chief, there were 4 of us who were in the damage control unit.
Okay, so did you have to take care of on the base the damage that was done on the base?
No.
No.
We could have, but there was they basically were in tents, and their I don't believe their boats were not hit. We saw that the boats were not hit, but and their barges, they had barges along on the tied up at the base. So the tents, they had to get some new tents brought in, and some temporary barracks they had set up there.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So then, how long did the Sherman stay? What happened after that?
Well, we stayed, and after that, they renegotiated stay there. So we were still giving gunfire support, and we were also inspecting boats that were coming in, sampans, and to make sure that they were not carrying supplies to the Viet Cong. So in fact, we moved around Vietnam, and I don't have a map with me, but we had locations around the coast all the way up to Da Nang. Phnom Penh. There was an island called Con Sam. We went there. They kept prisoners of war there from the North Vietnamese. So we were all over
They kept
Vietnam.
North Vietnamese prisoners there.
Yes.
Okay.
And and then one time we would spend like 30 days on station, on patrol, then go and relocate to a different location, and then periodically we go to R&R, like Singapore or Bangkok. We went to Hong Kong twice. And our second visit to Hong Kong, while we were there was a Viet Cong ship attempting to get into South Vietnam to drop supplies off. And on the way back, because we were communicating with them on location from Hong Kong back to South Vietnam, and the Navy had them at bay, and then during the whole time, 2 days, it took us 2 days to get back on station, and upon arrival, everyone had to go to their battle station assignments. So we were at battle station, and within, I'd say, 15 minutes after arriving on station, the gunfire broke out. The artillery started firing back and forth, and this small ship took a charge to the water inlet, the river inlet, the outlet coming out of Song Dock, and we chased it in and firing illumination rounds. That's the flares, huge flares that would light up the sky and light up the area. And we sank them going into the river. And after we arrived back in Boston, they said that they'd recovered this rocket launcher from this boat that we sank.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I mounted it on a plaque. It may have been changed by now,
Mm-hmm.
to be mounted in the Coast Guard Museum.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never been there to see it, but perhaps one day
That sounds like something
in
you
the
should
future
go.
I'll get over to see it.
Huh.
But I try to put some of that stuff behind me.
Well, you don't like to think about it, huh?
Right.
Have you talked to I mean, when you came back, did you talk to people about what happened there?
Not particularly. No, it kind of suppressed it.
Mhm.
And I've been involved in the groups at the VA and some of the stuff we have discussed, but not an extent, not to an extended conversation about it.
Mhm. Okay. Um, let's see. So what? Let's see. What was the highest rank you achieved?
The highest rank I achieved was E4, third class damage controlman. As I
Okay.
imagine during the period required taking out courses. I did have a course to move up to the next level, but during the war and in war, you're out there. And when I returned, I was there in 1970. When we returned in 71, I only had 8 months
To go.
and then the exams weren't scheduled for this period, so I ended up just leaving as an E4. But upon returning
To the States, you
to the
mean?
States, and in June of 71,
Mhm.
I was assigned to a Coast Guard Loran station in Cape Athol, Greenland. I was supposed to be there for 5 weeks, because in the summer months, from March through, if you've been to Alaska, you know how the sun stays up 24 hours a day,
Mhm.
but same in Greenland.
Right.
And the repairs had to be done because when nighttime comes in October, it stays dark until about March again. And so there was a 5 week assignment, a 5 month assignment, supposed to be until November of 71. But with me, they put me in charge of the crew, so we completed that work in 5 weeks, rebuilding porches, duct work for the heating and ventilation into the barracks and to the area where they do the transmitting of the communications. LORAN, LORAN, is an acronym for long range navigation. Because these LORAN stations are set up around the world where they communicate around the globe through these LORAN stations. And in fact, I was diagnosed with, and they admit, and they were unaware that personnel assigned to those LORAN stations are affected by high doses of X-ray radiation.
Oh, really?
And just this January, the VA diagnosed me with hyperparathyroidism, and then I've had some tests done at Northwestern Hospital where they found lesions on my thyroid and a cyst on the parathyroid, which has been affecting calcium. The parathyroid affects calcium or regulates calcium. It's like a thermostat in the body for the calcium that goes in, and vitamin D. So they had me taking vitamin D and extra stuff, but supplements. However, because I've been breaking bones walking or tearing tendons, I've had tendon surgeries, back surgeries, and it's related to the thyroid and parathyroid
Lesions.
lesions and malfunctionings.
Hmm.
Right. So I'm in the
And
process
that's
of
all
having
from
the
the
VA
radiation.
from the radiation, because it was published. There was a report published in 2011 on the VA's website. And I just discovered it after I was diagnosed with this hyperparathyroidism. About 5 months ago, I was on the VA's website and found that personnel assigned to those stations were affected by the radiation and were succumbing to diseases, cancers, and what have you.
So they're going to pay for your treatment, of course.
Well,
right?
the only thing that they had me do was to take vitamin D from the
Because
VA.
they don't have any other.
Well, I made an
remedy?
appointment myself at the Northwestern Hospital. I did that on my own to have further exams, and they they did biopsies and found that the lesions were, in fact, benign, but they want to keep in contact with me on that. So I have other appointments scheduled for around the first of the year. And then the cyst on the parathyroid is they have concerns about that. So we're working to move for that. So I have other exams coming up, in fact, next month. This is service connected.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Was there any? I forgot to ask about when you hit the boat. Were there casualties? Vietnamese
Yes.
casualties?
Yes, there were Vietnamese casualties. The boat was sank, and I read some in some excerpts from some reports that I think they did recover bodies and some equipment or armament. But full in detail, I have not seen what occurred with that.
Okay. Was there any other combat situation that?
There was, other than firing, giving gunfire support, and at times we would be fired at, but of course we were missed. But the one boat or small ship was attempting to come into South Vietnam, but it was still in international waters, and we encountered them, and they they moved further out to international waters, and we escorted them, and they called for backup of, I think an aircraft carrier came and a destroyer from the Navy came, and we escorted them for like 4 days up to China, to about just outside of the territorial waters of Hainan. That's the same island where a U.S. plane was brought down, forced to land, and I think it was back in the 80s when the Chinese took possession of this plane on that island. But we went up to that island, and when they went into the territorial waters, we turned around and came back. We were out for 52 days on that particular.
52.
52 days, yes,
Wow.
underway. Because we would get fuel from tankers coming in the Highline. We would highline our fuel over, and supplies would take on, and then send them off, and we would continue our duties. Yes.
This was a Vietnamese boat that you were escorting, or what?
It was a Vietnamese boat.
And you were trying to get it out of?
Well, we wanted to make sure that they didn't get in to
Vietnamese
bring supplies. They were attempting to bring in supplies, and then especially at nighttime, there's this huge searchlight the Coast Guard has on the top of the mast, and they named it the Midnight Sun because they would light them up so bright. At nighttime, they had this beam trained on them to make, and then people who were armed and the machine guns were there in the event that they made an attempt to break or attack our vessel.
Okay.
And of course, the Navy had these 2 vessels following us. And they had jets, so I don't think that we didn't need all of that armament. They sent them out anyway.
Okay. Were you scared a lot when you were?
Well, being below decks and at the battle stations, you did get a sense of excitement. Some points it was, with the guns firing, you would feel the vibration of the vessel, and not, sometimes thinking that because I think the officers were more alarming than the actual battle itself, because everybody had to be cautious about what we did, and
Oh, really?
Yes, yes,
They were pretty strict.
pretty strict, yes.
Mm, huh.
But that's all part of the war. So that excitement of the war and the fears and all of that combined, it's a unique experience.
Mhm.
Yes.
Do you have some traumatic stress from it at all?
And well, especially when the we were bringing the bodies of our troops in, and
Mhm.
realize not knowing that they were all deceased, because when we got them off, we could see that they were a mess,
Oh.
on the stretchers and then taking them down to sick bay,
Uh-huh.
and the doctor asking for body bags.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
that
Yeah,
was
that's surprising they didn't tell you back then that they survived.
well, not until I attended the
Mm.
reunion in Portsmouth, Massachusetts, Plymouth, Mass. I'm sorry, Plymouth, Massachusetts.
Mhm.
That we learned because the stories circulated, and we were giving our accounts of what happened, and then we learned that we were in fact sprayed with one of the dioxins, the defoliants, and it may have been because it's more frequently used there, the Agent Orange,
Mhm.
and they only identify those dioxins by the color of the band around the 55-gallon drum, because they carry different colors, and the most used was the orange band. They had purple, white. I think one was yellow, agent white, agent purple, and agent orange.
Oh, that's why they
Right.
called it that.
That's why they called it that.
Mm.
But
And you
it
used
was
it?
a complex concoction of poisons to kill the vegetation.
Right.
Yes.
Why would you be doing that on your boat? Just
Oh,
spraying it out
they
there?
were spraying it uh, over the vegetation. I guess some of it came over out to where we were, right on the coast there in South Vietnam.
Oh, other people were spraying it.
Yes, the Air Force was primarily the sprayers of this. They used helicopters and fixed wing aircraft.
Oh.
Yes.
Hmm.
And then the boats, some Navy boats had this agent on them when they were spraying along the rivers.
Mm.
So it was saturated in there.
Hmm. They should have known. Have you had any health problems from that?
Many. I from breaking bones, just walking, and my feet, broken bones. I've had back surgery. I've been diagnosed with coming down with scoliosis, and scoliosis, when my research has been affecting children. There's curvature in the
Right,
spine.
right.
Um, I've been tearing tendons in my shoulder. I have 13 pins reattaching the upper bicep tendon in the shoulder. I have 2 screws reattaching the lower bicep tendon in my elbow. I've
Mm.
had the tendon in my right ankle. And it also appears to be on the dominant side. I'm right-handed, but the tendon in my ankle split vertically. It did not rupture, but it was split in two, like you would take uh, asparagus and split it vertically.
Mhm.
And right now, I'm diagnosed back in May with a torn quadricep tendon in the thigh, where that's the tendon that pulls the knee up when the leg is
Mhm.
bent. So with that, I have carpal tunnel, which is associated with that. I complained about the screws in my right arm and the elbow, and the VA sent me over to the University of Illinois for an EMG test, and they determined that I have pinched nerve in my neck, and the MRI shows where the vertebrae is pushing into the spinal cord,
Mm.
and the carpal tunnel, which I don't do any typing, repetitive motions. but
Is that
which it comes from
Agent
carpal tunnel,
Orange?
from Agent Orange, from the research I have,
Mhm.
and I have volumes of stuff that
Oh,
right
for
here.
here?
Yes, it covers the gamut of what I've gone through with, and then with the VA forms, I have identified 32 conditions that I'm filing for now with the VA as related to Agent Orange, from amyloidosis, hyperparathyroidism with the radiation. Um, it runs the
Are they
gamut.
responsive to you?
Well, I transferred from the one VA hospital where there are major complaints about this West Side Hospital in Chicago, Jesse Brown. We even had Senator Kirk come in to Chicago to take complaints. Congressman Danny Davis has looked into it, but to no avail.
Hmm.
They have attempted to get the West Side VA in Chicago to correct some of its actions there, but they seem to get away with much of their negligence.
Hmm.
I'm not sure if it's deliberate or just coincidence.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, the VA, it's been under the
Right.
microscope for a while.
Yeah, I thought things were improving.
Not to a large degree, no.
Hmm.
We know that they are taking care of the recent theater veterans from Afghanistan, Iraqi,
Mhm.
Kuwaiti veterans, but Vietnam veterans, World War II veterans, we've been pushed to the side, and they're taking care of the newer veterans.
Mm.
I guess when this phase period passes over, then the next group will get their turn.
Yeah, well, I wish you luck with that.
Right, thank you.
Was there anything else that happened? How long were you in Vietnam? Stationed on the boat?
I was in Vietnam for the year 1970.
Okay. It's the full year. Well, you got there May
No, we weren't there in the
18th,
full year. We were
to
there.
the end of 1970s.
Yes.
Okay. And did you live on the boat, or did you live
I was on the boat.
the whole time?
On the
Okay.
And
What
we
did you
trained.
think of the country? Go ahead. What you
Oh, we trained Vietnamese sailors to take over Coast Guard, old Coast Guard cutters that were being donated to South Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
So they, in fact,
They would come on your boat.
Would come on. We trained them. They were familiarized with shipboard handling. Excuse me. They were familiarized with the processes of navigation, propulsion systems, how to start engines and what have you, because they were taking over older Coast Guard cutters, which had diesel engines, and we had the two diesel and the two gas turbines. They weren't. It wasn't necessary for them to be familiarized with the turbines, only the diesels.
Hmm.
Right.
Okay. What did you think of the country?
The people, the country itself was, from just seeing it, it was a beautiful country. It was, to me, it was exotic, but the war attached to it was made it ugly.
Mm.
The people were very friendly, very. I guess when they were forced into a war, if a person is forced into a war, then they take on that demeanor. But overall, I think the Vietnamese people are a very social group of people. The ones who were on our vessel, you see the guys, and you would think strangely about people doing this today, but they would massage each other and without any other kind of implications going on.
Yeah.
And they had a very closeness. They would, it was just an affection they had for their people.
Uh-huh.
And,
Right.
and it wasn't anything like we have what's going on today.
Right, right.
Right. If you can understand what I'm
I
saying.
know exactly what you mean.
Yes.
Um, so do you regret going over there, or how do you think of it now?
I regret the kinds of damage that was done, the kinds of the extent of the injuries to the people with the poisons that were dropped on their homeland. Because I've seen stories and photos of births of children who deformed from the dioxins. I've seen veterans here who have succumbed earlier in life to being exposed to that. In fact, the hospital on the west side of Chicago, Jesse Brown, is named for Jesse Brown, who was once a secretary of the VA, who died from Agent Orange. In fact, his entire right from his shoulder was removed because he was affected by, he had a prosthesis from
So it
Agent
affects your
Orange.
muscle
Yes,
tissue?
it will, I've heard stories of people's bones being dissolved. And I'm not sure that that's what's going on with me, because just walking normally and breaking, and as I recall, in 2006, I broke the third metatarsal just walking, and I was thinking it was a sprain, just making a step. And later on in that particular day, I felt my foot was swelling. So I was talking with another department head, because I was a safety director in the hospital, and I'm telling her that my foot was swelling. I thought I had sprained it. She said, well, perhaps you should get an x-ray. So I went over to the x-ray department at the hospital where I worked, and the technician came back and said, your foot is broken. How did this? So I couldn't, but anyway, I had walked up all day on this foot with the bone, and it had shattered, it splintered inside. From the x-ray, you could see where it was splintered. So by the time I was off from work and then going to get treatment, the bone started to heal. So it was never properly taken care of in the left foot. Then in 2013, I broke the fifth metatarsal on this little toe side of the foot. Broke that bone just walking. Like I said, torn tendons, doing very little. So that stuff really has a latent and a very horrific effect on the body, on tissue. So,
They're going to use some component of Agent Orange as an insecticide. They've come out with a new one now that they're going to start using. I don't know, it's not the full Agent Orange, but I don't think that's a good idea.
no, I know when and they were using it in the United States for a period, and
Oh, for weed killer?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's right. I forgot about
And
that.
so it's been forbidden, it's been outlawed to be used. So here we are suffering from the vestiges of being exposed to that. So.
Right. Okay. So when did you leave the service?
I left the service in September 7th of 1971. I applied to attend school for that fall, because I had signed up on October 23rd to go away in 1967. So I wanted to get started in school for that fall, and they accepted me, and I presented the letter to the Coast Guard, and they gave me an early 1 month.
Was that DePaul?
No. That was Malcolm X College.
Malcolm X College.
Right.
Okay.
That's where I received a associate's degree from there.
Okay.
And I have a bachelor's from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale.
Oh, so you went there after
Yes.
Malcolm X. Okay.
Right.
And what do you do for a living? What did you do for a living after that?
Well, I worked as a firefighter for a period in the city of Chicago, and that's where the shoulder was torn, was ripped up with the bicep tendon, so I was off on disability, and then I ended up going over to county's Providence Hospital as a fire marshal and then safety director,
Mm,
and I was there for 13 years,
okay.
and I'm retired now. So.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else that you want to mention about your service or anything else about the military or Vietnam?
I think overall, Vietnam, well, the service itself, the military is a necessity to protect the country from foreign and or domestic enemies. But then, I look at other countries that are not targets. I look at Canada. They're north of us, but you never hear of Canada being attacked, or south of us, Mexico being attacked, or even you go over to countries that does not have this. Maybe it's something that perhaps it's something that grew out of the beginning of this country and warring with England and then France and then on and on. So I guess that's grown in there. That's implanted in the fabric.
Mm-hmm.
Because I compare it and look at other situations with sovereignties, and they don't have the issues that we have. And sometimes I question why are we having such a problem with being attacked unless we're doing something wrong somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and then these people who we're looking at are saying, we're not going to take this anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
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 So.
Yeah, I think